lot of people don't understand is how Canadians process mortgages versus Americans.
Can you imagine locking in a 2% interest rate for 30 years?
Listings seeking roommates has increased by 78%.
Inflation's gone up 16.5%.
About a lotto winner in Montreal, what are you going to spend your money on? He's like, I want to buy a house.
How many people really are making $160,000 a year?
In order to restore affordability in Ontario, 1.85 million homes need to be built by the end of 2030.
Welcome to the Where to Begin in Real Estate podcast with your hosts, Maggie
and Agnes. We're back and ready to give you our unfiltered opinions on all things real estate and life.
So last week, the Bank of Canada held their policy rate at 5%. Not shocking.
No, but did you hear they think that inflation isn't going to go back down until 2025?
I'm not surprised because they didn't increase it. So it's going to take longer, right?
Yeah. Do you think we're still going to see more increases?
I think there's a good chance, right? Before the end, like they're still in December, another announcement.
Yeah.
So obviously we don't know, but
yeah. So
what do you think?
I said it in the last episode. I do think that we're going to see another increase, but no one knows.
No.
So I wanted to just bring up a quick article that I found interesting. So it was actually released by Fraser Institute and basically it analyzes the growth in employment income among 141 metropolitan areas in Canada and the US. So any cities between Canada and the US that have populations of over 400,000. And it was pretty interesting because only 3 Canadian cities ranked in the top half. So St. Catharines, Niagara, 51, Quebec City, 52, and Vancouver, 57. So the remaining 11 are all on the bottom in the ranking, which I'm not very surprised about it. Employment income in Canada's largest city, Toronto, was actually stagnant from 2010 to 2019, only increasing by 0.4%.
That's crazy because if you think of inflation and how it's gone up and has gone up a lot in the last 10 years, but people's incomes aren't. So like that's why we are where we are. That's what we said a few episodes ago. Like life is hard. Everything is so expensive. And that's a big contributor because people can't afford it if their income is not going up at even close to a similar rate. And I just wanted to pull up the Bank of Canada calculator. So in the same period over the last 10 years, inflation's gone up 16.5%. But in a lot of these cities, people's incomes are barely going up. Like in St. Catharines, it's 1% over the same period.
Yeah, that's crazy. The city that
is the highest. In Canada.
So that ranked 51. If you look at Hamilton, the growth is 0.6 between 2010 and 2019, and that ranked 83. And Hamilton's growing. Yeah. London, a 0.4 increase, that ranked 97. Kitchener-Waterloo, 0.4 increase, ranked 99.
Yeah. Well, obviously in the States, there's more income. All that is saying in the States, income is growing at a faster rate than most of Canada, right? And Canadian cities.
Yeah, like Canada's largest cities are growing more slowly and comparable than US cities. So we're actually foregoing like higher living standards compared to the US.
Oh, yeah.
Another interesting thing too that I think a lot of people don't understand is how Canadians process mortgages versus Americans.
This is, I think, a great thing. Yeah. I know it, but a lot of people I know in the industry like don't know, or like friends and family. So I think this is a great point you brought up.
Yeah. So here in Canada, we have, shorter terms. So for example, you could do a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year term. There are obviously 10-year terms you can do, but in the US, it's very common that you have a 30-year term. So for example, if you buy a home let's say you bought it in 2020, 2021, when interest rates were really good, you were able to lock in for 30 years.
Can you imagine locking in a 2% interest rate for 30 years?
I think they're typically a little bit higher in the US,
Yeah.
but the thing is, you don't even have to requalify or anything. So you
Right.
have that mortgage for 30 years. And even to break that mortgage, the penalty is a lot smaller than breaking like a 5-year mortgage in Canada. Yeah.
Yeah, and the qualifying I think is another interesting point because when you go to renew at 3 to 5 years, even if your like job hasn't changed, like we were just talking about like income growth, right? So like let's say you're not making any more money, but these interest rates have gone up, you might not qualify on the house like on your own home and be forced to do something different, like take a longer amortization, move, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to like look at this employment growth
Yeah.
because our interest rates are going up, but our income is not really increasing. And we also have strict rules in terms of qualifying for a mortgage. Whereas in the US, you only have to qualify once. And if you want to stay with that mortgage for 30 years, you can, unless you get a different mortgage or whatever in the States, then you would have to requalify. But you can literally live the American dream if you stay in one home, you have that 30-year mortgage, and you just work your way into paying it off.
Yeah. So different.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing too to note here in Canada, if you take a 5-year term with, let's say, TD Bank, and you know that you likely can't requalify, you can just roll into another term, but you aren't able to negotiate any terms like refinancing or switching lenders or anything like that. So you do have that option to stay with your lender and not requalify for another 5-year term, for example, but you have to take whatever rate they're offering you and you're not able to make any changes to your mortgage product.
So I guess there's like benefits to both and downfalls because I'm thinking like in the States, yeah, it's great that you can stay for that term, but you know, when interest rates are at a high, you might, and then you have to pay when you go to refinance, you're paying penalties. So you can refinance and then get a lower rate when that happens, but you're paying penalties. So it's kind of like it just there's like good and bad to both. And I think it's like all about timing, right?
Yeah.
Like getting a 30-year versus taking like a 3 or 5 year. And the fact that we are renewing is good as interest rates change, right? And you have the opportunity to take like a lower rate without a penalty
Yeah.
if it lines up that way, right? So I think it's all about timing. I'm just thinking.
Yeah. And for a 30-year term, though, when you look at it, it's better for a budgeting perspective because you know what that
Right.
payment is going to be for the next 30 years. But even if you do, if you're Canadian and you have a 5-year term and you're paying a certain amount of mortgage payment for those 5 years, when it comes time to get a new term and you decide to just remain with your lender and make no changes, that payment will change.
Right. And like we said before, right now a lot of people's mortgages may be doubled or went from 4,000 or 1.5. They're at 4,000, now they're at 6,000, which is a big difference.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think you have to think long term too. I always like say that to clients and myself too. Like when I'm buying a property, knowing that like, and that's why the stress test is great too, right? Like you're qualifying at a bit of a higher rate and then you have that cushion because you don't know where rates are going to go.
Yeah,
And you
exactly.
want to make a smart decision knowing that like rates might be higher. Can you still afford it? How long are you going to hold it? I think it's important to like think about all these scenarios and not just buy and like be house poor.
Yeah, the stress test exists for a reason
Yeah.
because of how our economy is structured when it comes to mortgages.
Yeah.
It's there to keep you safe at the
Right.
end of the day.
Which it sucks for some people, but I think it's a good thing.
Yeah. Why don't we talk about how much house prices are in certain regions
Yeah.
now that we've looked at income?
Yeah.
Because there's another interesting article here that we have.
Yeah. So we pulled an article from Stock Trades that goes over the cheapest places to live in Ontario. So the 10 cheapest places, starting at the 10th, is the Niagara region. The average home price is $654,000. Then there's London, Ontario at $607,000. Sarnia's the next at 575. Kingston 557, Windsor 551, Sudbury 429, North Bay you can get a home for 407,000, Thunder Bay 325, Sault Ste. Marie at 276, and Timmins is the cheapest place to purchase in Ontario with the average home price of $259,000. So,
Well, there you have it. Everyone's moving to Timmins or Sault Ste. Marie.
so like Niagara region's the closest one to the GTA. So I think that's a good one to talk about just because that's kind of like, where we do a lot of our business, and where I think predominantly there's a higher population. So looking at that, so that's just over $650,000. Sounds cheap, but I wanted you to like break down really like what kind of income do you need to qualify for that?
So if you're putting a minimum down payment,
Yeah.
let's just stick with that example. You need to make an income of 160.
Yeah. That's
I broke this down further in terms of like what your mortgage payment will look like,
yeah.
and what you bring home per month if you were to make that much. So if you're making 160K, you're basically bringing home $8,600 a month, and your mortgage payment would be just under $4,000. That doesn't include any of your bills, doesn't include any property taxes or anything like that.
So it's like almost half.
Yeah.
So half of your income or just under is going towards your mortgage.
Yep.
And like we've talked about it with the cost of living, you don't have a lot of room to like travel or do things. So and how many people really are making $160,000 a year? Like Stats Canada said that last year, the average income for one person in Ontario was $52,000. So you would need more than three people together to qualify for that with the average, right?
Yeah.
So not that many people are in that situation. So that's why we're seeing a lot of, everyone says it's easier if you are a couple or, two people are purchasing together. But that's also why we're seeing a lot of like people renting out their basements or doing creative things because that's not attainable for the average person.
Yeah.
Like the spread is crazy. And then even just kind of going back to what we said before with like the income growth versus the like interest rates and all that.
Yeah. It's really difficult to qualify for a mortgage right now. And if you have a family, so even in this scenario, you get a home for 650 in the Niagara region, you make 160 and half of that's going to your mortgage basically. What if you have a family? What if your kid is in hockey or dance and just even the food that you have to buy to feed your family? Maybe you have a pet that you have to buy food for. It's just a lot to live right now.
It's a lot. Looking at the numbers, it's crazy.
I actually I saw a really, I don't want to say funny, it's actually kind of sad. I saw this article about a lotto winner in Montreal that won $50 million. And when they asked him, what are you going to spend your money on? He's like, I want to buy a house.
Yeah.
I just want to buy a house and a car, he said. I just want to buy a house and I want to buy a car. That is what our economy is like right now.
Yeah, it's tough.
Like back in the day, if somebody won $50 million, the answer would probably be like, I'm set for life. I'm buying myself a house. I'm buying my mom a house.
Yeah.
I'm going on like a cruise. I'm buying a jet. Like now it's just to survive.
Maybe do a little bit more, but yeah.
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 I mean, hopefully you're investing most of that, but
Hopefully. No, it's very different now for sure.
so Fraser Institute also released another study. And basically, they found a particularly sharp increase in the number of home buyers and renters in Ontario relative to the number of new homes completed. Homes completed occurred starting in 2014. So, roughly a decade ago, the population in Ontario was growing by 1.6 people for every home built. But in 2022, we let in almost 500,000 people into our country. That has now skyrocketed to 5.5 people per home built. So that's the highest number in 50 years.
That's, yeah, crazy. And like that's why everyone's saying we have such a supply shortage. We did going into the pandemic, and it's just gotten extremely worse over the last few years. And now that we have committed to these high immigration numbers, I mean, obviously immigration is great, but it's making it like even tougher.
Yeah. CMHC actually released a stat that said that in order to restore affordability in Ontario, 1.85 million homes need to be built by the end of 2030.
That's like obviously not going to happen.
You said it.
Okay, never say never. It might
Yeah.
happen. But I don't know for sure, obviously, but that's just an aggressive number. That's
Yeah.
that's my reaction.
And
That's a
it's
very
not far
aggressive number.
away.
No.
Like 2024 is around the corner.
Yeah. Yeah. That's and what would we just say? Like how many homes were built last year? It's in I don't know how that's possible.
Last year, builders were only able to build just under 72,000.
Yeah. So
And we continue to let more people into this country, which I don't think is a bad thing.
no.
But if you're breaking down how many homes we need per
Just
person,
looking at the math. Like just looking at the math, I don't know how it's gonna pan out.
yeah.
Where's everyone gonna live? Everyone's gonna have a basement apartment.
Yeah,
All
exactly.
homes are gonna be turned into like fourplexes.
If people are going to be renting out rooms.
Well, and I think too, I know this in Hamilton, like there's a lot of condos going up. Like a lot of development we're seeing now is condos, right? And so in dense areas, builders are building condos because the number of doors that we need for people, that's where the focus is. So I think that we're going to just see more density happening in a lot of areas where before they were maybe more of like a suburb. They're going to kind of shift into like more dense,
Yeah.
right? With like a bunch of condos. That's kind of I see like the solution that I think a lot of builders and cities are encouraging right now.
Yeah. I think condos is definitely going to be part of the solution. But another interesting thing that I recently saw online was that listings seeking roommates has increased by 78%.
I'm seeing more of that. That's a high number, 78%.
I called you
Yeah.
recently. I was driving and I was listening to the news, and some woman, and I can't remember who it was exactly, but she's like, during this difficult economical time, what you should be focusing on is going over your monthly budget and maybe even considering renting out a room in your home.
Can you imagine?
I was just like, I was shocked.
I'm just laughing because it's like your home. I understand renting out a space, making like a separate basement apartment or separate unit, but just like having a stranger live in your home, I don't know. That's like,
And no hate, some people
yes,
have to do it,
absolutely.
and I totally respect that, but I don't think that that's practical for everyone.
No, like you have kids. Like
Yeah,
you can't just be renting out a room in your home and having someone come and go as they please. And you have
yeah.
your kids just like also just not knowing them, but your kids' bedtime, like kids, like, they're on a
What is the
schedule.
solution here? Is the government going to provide money so that I can put in a basement unit into my home so that I can rent out a room? Like, I would never personally put someone just in a room in my home unless I just really had to, which a lot of people are doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
78% is a huge number.
That's a big number. That's a big number. And I know that evictions are at an all-time high. So data shows the number of applicants landlords had filed to evict tenants for personal use in 2023 so far has already surpassed the total number of applicants in 2022. In Ontario, landlords can use something called an N12 eviction notice to force tenants to move out of an apartment if the owner, a member of the immediate family, or caregiver wants to move in. An N12 can also be issued for the same reasons by someone who's just bought a property. And they've increased 77% in 2023 based on the same first 9 months in 2022. And the landlord tenant board takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months to get a hearing. So and that's what I've seen. But And that's what we're kind of seeing in the market right now. A lot of investors are giving N12s and they're moving in or they're selling the property just because like interest rates have gone up, mortgages have gone up. What rent, like, and we talked about this on the other episode, but rent can't cover a lot of people's mortgage payments.
Yep.
So now all these tenants are getting evicted and where are they going to go? And this
Yep.
is also why the rental market is so competitive and why rental prices are so high because all these people are leaving now and competing. Like I had just rented out a condo last week and the day that we put it up, we had 3 competing offers and everyone was negotiating up. That's what we're seeing.
Well, an N12 is also, I wouldn't say easy solution, but an option for some landlords to just abuse it a little bit because rent, that they might have been charging 8 years ago was much lower than what they can get now. So I think we're seeing a lot of that as well. Um, it's just a faster option for landlords, unfortunately, and some landlords are abusing that. Um, but when you look at a landlord that has somebody in a unit, for example, and they've served them with this eviction notice, um, that tenant can basically say, I'm upset that you're doing this and I'm refusing to pay. And the landlord tenant board, like you said, is backed up by 6 to 12 months. That could potentially really hurt someone if they're doing it because of honest reasons. For example, if their mortgage payment is $3,000 a month and they don't have that paid for 6 months, that's $18,000.
Yeah, that these landlords are out of pocket.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because you have to move in. Of course, people always abuse everything, but you just see it more during hard times.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, the tenant has to prove that the landlord is physically not moving there. Harder to prove that they're not selling,
Yeah.
obviously. But yeah, like that, we're seeing that happen, and it's definitely unfortunate.
Yep. And we need landlords.
We do.
Like we're
Not
seeing
every,
we're seeing that all these homes have to be built and landlords are a good thing. They're
yeah,
providing people with places to live, especially if a home is like a duplex or
yeah.
triplex. That's an option for people looking for homes. So,
And we're saying how hard it is to get into the market. So everyone, this younger generation, it's harder for them to buy, but they still need somewhere to live. They need somewhere to rent. Like, it's so we need landlords, like you said.
yeah. So when you look at the overall picture of how slow income is actually growing, what house prices are, what's going on with the rental market, it really is just a crisis that we're in, to put it in simple terms.
For sure. Yeah.
And the expectations that we have to get inflation down to the 2 to 3% range and to get rent under control and to get income up, to build enough houses for everyone that is coming into this country, they are just really big goals.
They're
And I don't
aggressive.
think we have the right measures in place right now to achieve those goals.
And the goals too are aggressive and they're going to take a long time. We started this out with you saying now they're thinking that inflation is going to get under control in 2025, right?
Correct.
That's 2 years. So, but what's going to happen in the next year or two for everybody? That's a long time from now. And a lot of people right now, it's tough.
Yeah,
So what's the impact going to be? Like, I know
exactly.
you don't have the answer, but I'm just thinking that, yeah, it's hard.
Well, we'll keep monitoring and keep giving you guys updates. And
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. We're very excited to have you listen. Please follow us on Spotify and Apple and YouTube and subscribe.